Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock, and we started this by saying, "Are you ready?" And I lied. I'm not ready, but we're here anyway.
Well, that's a dumb question because we're never. I mean, we've talked about it many, many times. We're never truly ready. It's just like
I'm really not ready, because
I'm not even at home right now. I'm walking down the sidewalk. Whoops.
Steve, do you know where the fuck my house is? No, because this week I've been super busy, and I couldn't even plan a creepypasta. I literally pulled up a creepypasta a minute before hopping on to do the show.
But that's the best way to do it, because I made it all the way through high school with at least a C average by operating that exact same manner.
Cramming in 100%. A marathon writing session in one night. I wish I had
sometimes the 5 minutes between class.
Yeah.
You sit down and I was totally that kid that was writing his report as the bell rang. But
if you weren't, if you weren't that type of slacker kid, I just have to ask, what were you fighting for? Why did you try so hard for people who didn't care about you?
And then I think about my friends that did try hard, and they all have way better paying jobs than me, and say,
they're not happy though.
That's why. Yeah, but are we?
No, but I didn't have to work as hard, so I'm unhappy. But I have more energy.
I win.
Which is to say, no energy. That's at least what I tell myself to make myself feel better about the fact that I'm lower class.
I'm lower class, but I didn't try, so ha.
Yeah, so fuck you. Burning the system down.
That's the beauty of not trying, though, is that maybe you would have tried and failed, and then you feel like shit because you fail. If you don't try, you're like, I just didn't try.
Yeah, that's really what this show is built on. So me not really having a topic is true to how I approach the show every day of my life, which is it could be the biggest podcast in the world if I gave a fuck.
That's our motto, by the way, if this is your first time listening. We could be the biggest podcast in the world.
Yeah. Imagine if I unleashed even 10% of my power to make this show remotely successful.
See, you're joking, and then 2 weeks from now when it's it'll be 3 because of Thanksgiving, but whatever. Next time it's your topic, I'll be like, yeah, welcome to Non-Essential, and then you'll sit down and be like fucking David Attenborough over there this week on the Non-Essential Podcast, I've got 13 witnesses to this unsolved crime.
It's just narrating forensic files.
Yeah. But it'll be like a case that you personally investigated over the Thanksgiving break.
But then his case was overturned by pesky DNA.
So remind me to learn a couple of those jarring minor chords or something on the guitar, so I won't contribute anything, but every now and then you'll say something and I'll just be like bong.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's really all we need is just musical interruptions. So yeah, like I said, I did find a fill-in creepypasta. I have no fucking idea if this will even. This might be a waste of a fucking show, even by our standards. We'll see. And I just ate fucking fast food, so my throat wants to close up and die. But I only had 10 minutes to eat and to have everything lined up. But instead of being like, hey, could we push the show off? I'm like, nah, the show will go on even if I'm shit-faced drunk and have no material.
The point is stop criticizing us, you jerks.
So this creepypasta is called George. There was no author name.
It was George.
No, because this is from the narrator's name is Andrew.
Well, that's fucking confusing. Then why is the story called George?
I know.
I'm not going to give you. I'm going to do the thing my wife does all the time when we're watching a movie, and it's the first 30 seconds.
You really just want to share a movie you like with the love of your life, and they decide this will be a good time to just blast this shit with criticisms.
She does that thing where it's the first time either of us have we're watching the movie for the first time together, and they'll be they'll introduce the mystery, and she'll be like, what do you think that means? It's like, or not even what do you think that means? That's asking an opinion. She's like, what does that mean? And it's like, I don't fucking know, but the way that they worded it, it's clear they're going to
still alive.
It's worded very clearly that they're getting ready to reveal that. Like, I know as much as you know at this point. So this is to criticize your wife when she's not listening podcast, but her friends listen to it. So
she really hurt my feelings when we started this show. So said I had a weird. Said I had a weird voice. I'll never let that go. Never.
I do have a weird voice.
I mean, it only hurt because it's absolutely true. I'm a freak. Turn the show off. All right, so this is George. Hello, my name is Andrew. I live in London. I am currently 20 years old and living still with my parents. So already, sentence structure, we're in for a good time.
Yeah, I can tell.
I am living still. They constantly pressure me to move out of the house and find a job as I find myself doing nothing with my days. Now I'm back on board because I relate to that. I just sit in my room and stare at the walls. I don't see a point in finding a job now with what I know now. All we can do is wait.
That sounded like a Alanis Morissette lyric. Like, why find a job now that with what I know now?
What you gonna do now? I first moved to Hampstead High School after the summer of 2007. I was 15 and it was my first day at this new school. I had to leave the last school due to bad issues with bullying. You see, I never had really fit in with my peers for as long as I can remember. I didn't play sports and wasn't physically fit whatsoever, nor did I enjoy playing chess or entering the science and math clubs. So at either ends of the popularity spectrum, I was shunned.
See, this is where our society has everything completely fucking wrong, though. They're like, yeah, you're not going to be a star at either end of the spectrum. That's exactly where I felt. Like, I was definitely not an athlete, but I really wasn't a, like, nerd. I guess I was, but...
I feel like most of us, there's some people who really get fucked with, and there's a good chunk of people who fuck with people a lot in high school, but most of us, I just think, we just sort of fly under the radar and are quietly miserable.
Yeah, and that's the perfect place to be, because at least you're, like, miserable but being left alone. Like... Yeah,
like, anytime you, like, got a target on your back, that's how you get a combustible situation. Which is funny, because I flew under everybody's radar, kids, teachers, everything, except one teacher who thought I was running a gang. And I feel like you don't have to listen to this show very long to know that my street cred ain't there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at you. Actually, I'm laughing at that teacher, because that is the funniest thing I've ever heard.
I'll never forget the last day I was at that school. I went out to eat with my family. That's sort of like, hey, you don't have to go back there anymore. I hadn't graduated. This was like... Or no, this was the end of high school. That's right. I had just graduated, and I ran into that same teacher at the Mexican restaurant I went to, and he, like, packed up his whole family and ran out.
Hey, what are you doing here, essay?
Like I'm going to just, like, slide in and eat with him and just, like, intimidate him like prison rules.
And it's funny, in fairness, I didn't know you when you were in school, but I know you, like, over the last 10 years, you, like, being a member of some dangerous, like, to teachers gang.
So cool.
It's just kind of...
God, I wish. Yeah. Like, I wish I had the fucking rep on the streets that he thought I had. I would have, like, again, if I had used all my power. So, at either ends of the popularity spectrum, I was shunned. At this school, I anticipated exactly the same treatment from my classmates as I had before. Of course, I was right. As soon as I entered the cafeteria at lunchtime after half a day of your generic school lessons, I immediately noticed all the little cliques and groups, each huddled around their own tables, with which no one of an opposing group dared to tread. It was my job to try and mingle with one of these groups or else. Like my last school, I would be eaten alive. Oh, sorry. He That was my bad reading it. It's one sentence. It was my job to try and mingle with one of these groups, or else, like my last school, I would be eaten alive. It was natural selection in its purest form. I was dreading having to attempt to socialize and warp my personality to suit these herds. But a spark of relief hit me when I saw, on the furthest table back, another loner sitting there. I felt quite optimistic when I saw him. We both have no group to belong to, so we could just be ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's terrible strategy.
Never worked. Ever.
No, there's a reason that person's
You can
a loner.
go sit by him, but you don't talk to him.
Right.
You just be awkwardly alone together.
Well, the best way to single yourself out as a loner is to try to hook up with the loner, the already loner. Yeah. Like your better bet's to look for the ones that don't look like they'll shove you.
Like you realize you have nothing in common. At worst, you get a fucking Columbine kids thing. Where it's like, hey, we're both fucking psychopaths together.
Or you sit down next to the guy and you're like, hey, what's up? He's like, hey, cool. Do you love fucking horses too? And you're like, ah, damn it. I hooked up with the horse guy. Oh, well, I got no choice now but to join this clique.
Become a horse guy. Fuck. High school stuff.
Yeah, no. Way better strategy is just to find a medium looking table. Like I said, like we just said, though, most of those tables are just like average kids skating through and just like kind of stand behind them and work your way into the group and hope they don't notice you're new. Yeah. You'll just,
Like when I was in high school and stuff, we were kind of just getting into the point where everybody was starting to have smartphones. And like I wish that I had that for more of my schooling, because it would save you in those awkward points. Because it's like, I'm not lonely. I'm just on my phone a lot, you know.
Right.
It was the perfect cover.
And I gotta say, I always get kind of bored of this like school, like, oh, it's a cliquey thing, and I'm the new kid and I can't fit in. But I gotta give the disclaimer that like I grew up in a relatively small town that like the population kind of exploded, and it wasn't that small by the time I graduated, and it's like 4 times as big now. But I grew up in the same school district. We never moved. Yeah. And so like me and the couple, like maybe 100 other kids or so that were like in that school initially, like I always had kids that I just had known since like preschool. Yeah. So I never did really have to deal with that, because even if like you were in a situation where you weren't like friends with somebody, there's always somebody that you're like, oh, I know that person. But anyway, I just find this like trope of like the new kid like boring, not because it's necessarily unrealistic, because I think we've all been, a new job or whatever, but it's just like,
I mean, I can't give it too much shit for that, because like it's all, I think even if we weren't on like an extreme end of like being bullied spectrum, like I think most people, like I kind of said, like I think most people kind of float in the middle, and there are probably times you can point out where it's like I was being a bully, and then there were points where I was being bullied, and you kind of just wallow in that middle ground. But
and it, like I said, it is always kind of uncomfortable and a lot of anxiety when you're new and you just don't.
But what I was going to say is, like, even though I think we're all sort of all over the place on that spectrum, I think we all feel that extreme sometimes where you just feel really out of place. And you got to set up your fucking story somehow. So this is about a weird kid, so let's get to it.
Walk up to the biggest kid and you shiv him with a broken lunch tray. That's how you do it.
Yeah. It would be fun. Anyway. That would be a twist if you told a whole story like this and then revealed that these were full-grown adults in prison.
It was my first day and I didn't know who to sit with.
I went to the awkward fucking dude with like a full facial tattoo and hit him with a lunch tray. I felt quite optimistic when I saw him. We both have no group to belong to, so we could just be ourselves. I mean, we already have something in common anyway. So after buying my practically plastic food from the cafeteria, I parked myself on the seat next to him. He didn't look the way anyone else did. His face was as pale as snow, yet it still looked healthy. By contrast, his hair, which was neatly combed, was jet black. So dark you could hardly see the textures in his hair. It was the darkest shade of black I have ever seen in someone's hair. He also...
Aw, baby's first goth.
Yeah. You're learning about the world today. He's going to introduce you to the Cure. He also, unlike the other students, had his tie neatly pulled up to the top of his collar, and his shirt was tucked in. It was radically different to the way I dressed, which was sloppy, to say the least. I then, after making this observation, awkwardly introduced myself to him as Andrew Lambert and asked him what his name was. He slowly turned around to me with this blank, pale, aloof, and unamused expression, with his eyes with irises as black as night. I initially thought he was going to say something hostile until he calmly said, "My name is George. George Oliver Davies."
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Anybody that includes their middle name is a serial killer, so...
His first name's George Oliver. He's one of those kids.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah. Of course you have a perfect tie. He said it in a very eloquent and formal tone, probably the most formal tone I have ever heard from someone in my age. I felt as if I was in a business meeting or something. I would have laughed, but something tells me he wouldn't have took it so well. He maintained that blank, expressionless face until about, I would say, 20 minutes into the lunch break, where he folded his arms and scanned the room with intensity. He stared at each student with a piercing, unmoving, undeterred gaze, which seemed to make them rather unnerved, even forcing some to leave the cafeteria, which I totally would do. Like, okay, that kid's staring me down. Something's going to go down in this cafeteria. Get me the fuck out of here.
But you got to do that thing where you like push your chair back and you stand up like you're about to go over and confront him, and then you just turn around and walk away.
Yeah.
Like
fist clenched, and then just like
as fast as you can.
Yeah,
like
I gotta go.
He called my bluff.
I saw him slightly shake his head at them as if he were disappointed or angry. His stare got more and more hate and fury filled, and caused one student to flee in terror. To my surprise, no one stopped him or even questioned him as to why he was staring at them so harshly. They just sat there, silent, and the before booming cafeteria was now silent. I saw that people began to sweat and bury their faces in their hands. Some even began to shiver and cry, mumbling to themselves as they left the area. I never saw them again. I asked him why he was staring at them. He finally broke his stare and said to me, "Something is wrong here. It needs to be fixed."
So I like to think that this is a daily occurrence. Like the kids all just try to have their lunch, and every fucking day they're like, "Damn it, George ruined it again.
Yeah,
I'm out of here."
And if George gives you the shit eye, you gotta leave. Before I could ask him what he meant, the bell sounded for class time, and George swiftly stood up. It was then I noticed how tall he was. He stood a towering 6 foot 6 inches tall, which, wow, you can tell that from the eyeball test.
I've met people that are pretty good at that, and I think they're witches.
Yeah.
I see a guy, I'm like, he's somewhere between 5'8" and
guess a duck's
18.
weight, and you'll be fucking burned alive, witch. It's like, he stood a towering 6 foot 6 inches tall and towered over everyone in the entire school. As he walked to go to his next class, he circled around some students and then leaned over and whispered in one of their ears. After he did, the student began to stare at the ceiling and closed his eyes. The color drained from his face, and he even looked at me as if he began to sob. He then sat there as the sobbing got louder and louder until he ran out of the room, tears just streaming from his face as he wept loudly throughout the corridors, vexed by what he must have heard. So I joked about this guy's writing, or girl. We
talked about that last week.
Yeah, we're always fucking bad about making that assumption. But this person actually writes kind of how I used to write, in that way too many commas and not quite knowing where to put other punctuation.
Yeah, I used to do that. I don't do that still.
I've cut down on commas drastically. I hate them.
Yeah, but I've only cut down on them because I replaced them with the M dash.
Yeah, because M dashes are great. I love when I can whip one of those out. was like, bam, I know where that goes, even though most editors would be like, no, you don't.
Yeah, that's not how you use that. It's like, that's how I use it.
It's a pause in the action, and I decide when it applies.
It's like, but there's 13 of them in a row in this line. You're like, yes, it's a big pause.
That's why I'm unpublished, is I always have that criteria with my editors. Is like, you don't get to remove any of my M dashes. And then they're like, well, then it's illegible.
Like this one indicates a pause in speech. This next really long one indicates bathroom break.
This next one really indicates that you just love M dashes. Again, like the others, I never saw him again. I myself was very disturbed at this point. I never heard or saw George for the remainder of the day, and several students in the school went home after lunch catatonic. I had a lingering fear and confusion in my mind as to what the fuck happened at lunchtime. I tried talking to some of the students in the class about it, but it was very aggressively berated by the teachers if I even mentioned the incident. The teachers turned around, and my memory is probably distorted, but I'm sure I remember one of them, when they turned around to shut me up, having exactly the same deep, all-black, abyss-like irises that George had, and the pale skin with that hate-filled expression. I finished the day not having absorbed anything that I had been taught that day, which is like the least of my worries. Is like, I didn't learn shit 90% of the days I went to school.
I was going to say, you know how many times I came home and my mom was like, gee, she looked dejected. What's wrong? Like, I didn't learn anything.
Yeah, and like
that happens 0 times.
A few strong years of alcohol, took out the other 10%. I finished the day not having absorbed anything that I had been taught that day, my thoughts dominated by the incident, as I walked home with the images of those students crying and fleeing. I noticed on the top of the large hill near my house, George was standing. I ran up the hill and asked him first what he was doing. He didn't answer. He instead looked upon London from the hill, and again looked all through the landscape as if he were scanning the world. I then asked him what happened at lunch, again to no avail. He stood there with his arms folded, his chin then moved upward slightly, and his face twisted to show this look of malevolent contempt on his face as he gazed upon the world. "George?" I said, wondering if he was in some sort of trance-like state. "Are you there?" With that question, he smirked and turned around to face me. "I've been here for a while." I looked confused. I like that he looked confused. No. I looked confused, but really I was keeping it together.
That's just my normal face. Huh?
I looked confused. "Are you okay?" "No," stated George in a very aggressive and assertive manner, "but I will be soon." He said in a chill-inducing way, calm yet with what I can only describe as a tone as if it were the eye before a storm. "I'm leaving tomorrow."
The eye doesn't come before the storm.
That's
That'd
true.
Be weird.
That's half a storm. That's pretty cool. We got lucky. We only had to deal with half of it. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he snapped, "but I'll be back soon." "Why are you going?" I asked. "You ask a lot of questions, don't you?" he said with that smirk crawling its way up his face. "Okay, I'll tell you tonight." And with that, he simply just walked away, and I was left a persistent feeling of dread and uneasiness, one that still exists to this day. I sat there as darkness engulfed the skies. I realized that George couldn't tell me anything, as he didn't have any means of contact with me whatsoever. So I repeated this to myself to calm my feeling of anxiety, and then my eyelids fluttered, and eventually I was asleep.
Do people's maybe it's like just my eyelids are lazy, but my eyelids don't flutter before I fall asleep. But
they just slam shut.
Pretty much, yeah.
Just a fucking like an old shed door.
It even creaks like that, yeah.
Yeah, most people blink, Steve. Mine flutter as if like they're gonna carry me away.
What's weird to me about the phrase that, like, my eyelids fluttered and I fell asleep, is to flutter, that's like rapid. Yeah. By the time I'm falling asleep, I do not have energy even to like rapidly move just eyelids. It's like,
yeah.
Like if I blink, that's about a 30-second process at that point.
Yeah. There were times where I was really having like bad sleep schedules and having to stay up, uh, for really long periods of times. So it's like try to readjust it. And that was the only time I could describe eye fluttering, where it's like you're really trying to stay awake, but your body's like, fuck you. I then suddenly awoke to black smoke blinding my eyes. My body felt as if it were being cooked in an unbearable heat surrounding my room. I could hardly breathe, the air so thick that it burned my throat as I inhaled. I cleared the smoke violently, coughing all the way to discover that my house was completely ablaze. My heart raced so much it felt as if was erupting from my chest. I was shaking and jerking and more fearful than I had ever been in my life. My eyes darted back and forth as I stormed through my rapidly burning house. I fiercely kicked down my parents' door only to discover that they weren't there. As the flames began to creep up, closer and closer toward me, attempting to cook my skin, which already felt as if it was melting in this heat, I frantically opened my parents' window as my house began to topple. I leapt out of the window and landed on the bushes outside my home. As I heard my home fall to pieces, I lifted my head up from the bushes to discover something terrible. It wasn't just my home that was on fire. The entire street was an inferno. Trees, cars, and even the people were burning. I looked up to notice this awful blood-red sky from which endless amounts of thunder bursted from, which to me sounded like screams of people suffering. Screams which, as I'm writing this, I can hear as if I were among them. I ran horrified through my street while the bodies of the dead were scattered like children's toys all throughout. Burnt to a crisp, some dismembered and mutilated beyond recognition. I ran and I ran until I halted suddenly to find my fucking parents just lying there, rotting away on the street like roadkill. I fell to the ground. All strength in my body had left me. I choked up, tears running rivers down my face, screaming in disbelief until I felt my organs were going to protrude from my throat. I then, after what seemed like an eternity of crying and vomiting and screaming, I turned to again notice George just standing there, looking at the destruction that was being caused. I raced up the hill, devastated, confused, and on the edge of sanity. I halted again and...
Sup?
Oh. What'd you say?
He's raced up the hill and to George he was like, sup?
Hey George, you see this shit?
Yeah, this stuff sucks. You got anything good going on?
Hey, you want to hang out? My parents are dead. I halted again, and to my terror I discovered that these flames, this destruction, extended to as far as the eye can see. All around I saw people being burned alive. I saw them raping each other, killing and defiling each other. If they're all dead and dying, how do they have time?
Hey, this one's organs are still intact, and they're only a little burnt. Let's go.
You know what I always wanted to do but couldn't do because I wasn't on fire? Rape. Killing and defiling each other, destroying each other. I saw the whole of London collapse before my very eyes when I heard him whisper in my ear. Now this is better, isn't it? He began to giggle at that. I looked at him and couldn't muster any words. He stared at me, smirking, a black liquid seeping from every orifice in his body and sizzling everything it touched. As he stared at me, the blackness in his irises spread, slowly like an infection, to completely fill his entire eyes. The liquid oozed from his face faster and faster until it was drenching and burning the ground beneath us, stripping it bare of all the flowers and grass that lived on it. As he continued to stare at me, images flashed in my mind. Threats of war, natural disasters, greed, corruption, death, destruction, doom. Some of these images I've seen before on the news. Some haven't happened yet. It was all build-up, cackled George. His tone got more demonic as I felt the blood drain from my face, my body feeling as if life itself was draining from it. His face, it was rotting and breaking apart. Clumps of his dead skin and pieces of flesh began falling on the floor, still cackling as it happens. His eyes began to pop and fall out of their sockets. His mouth gaped open and slowly begins to separate from his rotting, skinless body. I look upon him, the parasitic slime, and the world has now become just a putrid, decomposing mass. Amongst this, George's cackle can still be heard. It can always be heard. Then I woke up. I was shaking like a leaf. I was empty of joy, of happiness. I was destroyed after what I had just seen. Had I been to hell and back? is a question I still ask myself. My mother barged in and threw a letter on my bed and left, reminding me of breakfast. I looked at the letter. From George, it read. I resisted the urge to scream and vomit and forced all the courage and strength I could muster to read this letter. He's so close to hitting the I resisted the urge to shit. Or I was actively shitting. Like, the story's just missing that one thing to be a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, you could just go in and edit it. I was resisting the urge to vomit out my ass.
I was resisting the urge, but I admit I pooped a little. I resisted the urge to scream and vomit and forced all the courage and strength I could muster to read this letter, repeating to myself in my head, it was only a nightmare, just a nightmare. I opened the letter, and to my surprise, it only had one line. It read, now all you can do is wait. I then felt my mind explode with fear and my stomach constrict within me, and then I read the signature, yours sincerely, George Oliver Davies, G-O-D.
Yeah, I should have seen that coming.
The end.
Well, yeah, I guess if you're going to make friends with one person, a vengeful God works.
I don't know. That doesn't seem like you got out of anything. Just means you're going to die a little slower than the others.
And you get to watch everybody you care about die first. So yeah, maybe just blow me up in the initial explosion. Yeah. I don't know.
I like it. It wasn't like the most inventive monster, but it was actually not where I thought that story would go. Like I said, I had no idea where that story would go. All I knew was about some dude named George. But that is an interesting idea of, like, a creepy kid turns out to actually be, fucking Judgment Day incarnate.
Yeah, I did like that it, it had a lot of, like, the cliche. It's not the most original story, but you don't have to be. I mean, at the end of the day, every single story ever written is just Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yeah.
But, I do like that, like, it's kind of the minor twist, but, like, it not being necessarily Satan or some demon, but, like, and it works because on whatever level you want it to, but if you're Christian, you say, well, there's still going to be a judgment day, and that's what a lot of people think it's going to be like, at least for the people that aren't saved or whatever. So yeah, I like
really
that.
Fucking cool. Real fucking understanding. Of your fucking...
And I like that all of this is an excuse for him to never leave his parents' house or get a job. Like, what's the point?
I mean, that is like an element, though, of, like, a lot of people's depression is like that just sense of, like, impending doom.
Yeah.
So,
or futility, or both.
So, like, reading it from that perspective, I actually kind of relate to it a little more, because I am a lazy piece of shit, but there is also a philosophical, like, man, everything's
my
fucked.
Laziness has no reason other than pure. My laziness is pure and genuine, but
uncorrupted by.
Yeah, I don't need no excuses. It's just I don't want to do it.
I don't know. I need excuses. Like, why won't you mow the lawn? Well, North Korea has a new missile, so I haven't felt like it.
Yeah.
Sorry I'm being aware of the world, honey.
Yeah, and those are the kind of arguments nobody can, like, there's no rebuttal to that, because it's like...
Yeah, because then you storm off before anyone can counter. Be like, I need to go calm down and eat some crunch berries. We're on the edge of World War III.
Yeah, I liked it. It wasn't the most original, and it sounded like it was like
for something that I needed to find in 2 minutes.
You definitely have a way better record of last minute creepypasta finds than I do. I could have probably, maybe that's my creepypasta. I'm living it, like, we could have just switched roles and I could have picked the exact same story and it magically would have changed the ending to like, and then I saw him standing there and we were wearing the same shoes. How embarrassing. The end. And it's like, what the fuck was that?
It turns into a fucking inside joke between two people in the comments.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the show. That's the story.
Moral of the story, if you meet anybody, ask their full name
just be
and
a
see if the
fucking
initials...
in high school. It's okay.
Oh, yeah, that too.
You know? You might invite the fucking apocalypse if you try to make a friend. That's
the kicker is if his parents hadn't moved or whatever the hell like caused him to go to a new school, he would have never seen it coming. He would have still eventually died in the apocalypse, but he would have died blissful and working at like the 7-Eleven or something, like because he didn't know any better.
Did that letter have a return address to George? You just write him back and be like...
At least they didn't do that, like...
My pen pal George.
That thing where it's like, I tried to write him back and the postman was like, George? There's no George that lives here.
George Oliver Davies?
He died 50 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess it could get more cliche.
We get more cliche. And it's also a slasher story.
Slash romance.
Yeah. And Romeo and Juliet. Giorgio and Juliet.
I thought the world was going to die, so I killed myself. But then George, he thought he was giving me a present. When he saw I killed myself, he was so distraught he killed himself. But I didn't actually kill myself. And when I came to and realized that he really killed himself, then I really killed myself. The end. But
then I took his mask off, and it was George Oliver Davies the whole time. So.
Oh, but he spelled George with a J. I'm safe. It's not God. It's John.
Old man Davies.
Anyway.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show. We're going to be off next week because it'll be Thanksgiving time, and fuck it. I'll be full of gravy. Let's be real. That's the only reason there won't be a show. I won't be able to function.
I mean, if I'm 100% honest, I'm usually full of gravy when we do the show, but I don't even know where I'm going to be. It's a week away, and I don't know what our
I'll be honest. I don't even know if we're going to like do proper Thanksgiving dinner, but I'll have a mug of gravy.
Mug of gravy and football on TV. That's all you need.
Yeah. That sounds so gross. And also an ideal way to die. So have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. We'll see you after that. And bap-a-dap. Scoop-a-doo.
Scooby-Doo.
Woohoo.